Abigail, thanks for coming by.
Thanks for
Great
having
to have
me.
you.
It's good to be here.
You and I have done 10 years of this work,
Yes.
looking at how people perceive emerging technologies. It's always challenging to get people to think about something that doesn't exist yet. And that was certainly the case with the cellular agriculture focus groups.
Definitely.
Before we get into the results, why don't we just talk a little bit about focus groups?
Sure.
Because people have perceptions of these, the people behind glass, that's kind of true. I think the thing that is important for people to understand is just how much work goes into these.
Sure.
And kind of what can we expect to get out of them? Can we actually extrapolate the results? What are they good for? How do we do them?
So focus groups are very useful in getting a window into how whatever audience you're looking at or thinking about reacts to certain ideas, what they bring to the table in terms of their views and impressions, how do they respond to ideas, how do they interact with each other, and kind of the interplay of the discussion is useful. So what we do is we recruit, we had about 10 people in each focus group, and we did 2 focus groups in this case. One was among college-educated individuals with a 4-year college or more, and the other was among people that had lower levels of educational attainment. And the point is to really get those people in a room with a moderator, which in this case was myself, to facilitate a discussion. But really the moderator's role is to guide the discussion, and it's really an opportunity to have the respondents react and to have them reacting also to what the other people around the table have to say. It's really exploratory research in this case. We want that there had been no research done previously in terms of public opinion and public attitudes about cellular agriculture and how people might respond when they're given more information. So we really use the focus groups to go through sort of in a very intentional way. We had a sequence for first getting initial uninformed reactions to cellular agriculture as well as cultured meat, and then providing layers of information to people to see how they respond, what strikes them as things that are exciting or positive, what are their concerns, and sort of seeing how they respond to those various stimuli and additional information. And then also we rounded out the discussion by trying to get a sense of what these individuals feel about how the oversight should be regarding cellular agriculture. What are they looking for in terms of oversight, regulation, et cetera. So it's a 2-hour discussion with 10 or so people. We recruited, as I said, the college educated and the non-college group, but otherwise the group was a diverse mix in terms of gender. We had a fairly even balance. We got a good mix by age. We got representative in terms of racially, and then we also made sure that we got a representation in terms of religious affiliation, including some individuals who do not have a religious affiliation. Again, thinking that there is the potential for that to have an connection to how people might respond to this area of scientific study. So we wanted to get a diverse group there. It is qualitative research, so it cannot be extrapolated to the general public at large. We cannot say Americans feel X or Y. What we can say is that in these 2 groups of people that we spoke to, these are the things we heard. It sort of gives a contextualized sense of initial reactions to this area of scientific study.
So when people come in, they have no information.
Correct. They
They
are
don't know
not
what's
told at all.
And, you know, I remember doing this on nanotechnology, and people would take guesses and come up, well, it must be small, and something like that. This was an interesting one because people really didn't have much of an idea at all. And cellular agriculture, they, I think, tried to parse that a bit. But I think I remember seeing them kind of struggle with trying to get a handle on what this was.
Right, and we do recruit the group so that they don't know what the topic is. So that they come in sort of blind and fresh and are really giving us their top of mind individual reactions as well as this opportunity to discuss as a group. And you are correct, there really was no awareness at all of cellular agriculture, but people can make inferences based on the terminology. So people talked about things being man-made, they talked about agriculture, they talked about farming, they talked about GMOs, which is sort of an association that they automatically made just based on the term cellular agriculture. There were a few that mentioned cloning. So you can kind of see that and as the discussion evolves, there are some risks and benefits that people start to associate just based on the name. But again, this is just based on the name and not knowing anything else about it. We also tested the term cultured meat, and that similarly was not known. I think maybe one person in one or two of the groups had heard of it once we described it later in the groups, but initially that term itself was not known. It generated a more negative reaction just from the terminology than cellular agriculture. I think it's interesting to note cellular agriculture tended to get people to focus more on crops, whereas cultured meat, obviously, they're thinking of meat and livestock. So there are some distinctions, and it's important the terminology you use when you introduce any kind of new area of scientific study. And the public is going to take something away from it just based on their background, based on their understanding of the terms that you may use.
So at that point in the process, you then started to layer some information on. You gave them text to read, showed them a video, and every time they got more information, you sort of went back and said, how do you feel now?
Right. And initially, what we did is provided sort of a one-page, not even a page, kind of overview of what this was, understanding that we can't really explain the process of how it was made in that short of a time. But we wanted to give them a sense, generally speaking, of what it was. We also showed them a video that New Harvest has created.
And you also used some analogies to insulin creation, rennet, and some
right.
other things.
So some of the applications that are either have already are being utilized now or are in process. And what we find is, people, that additional information generates both interest in benefits, and these individuals can identify on their own potential benefits like expanding the food supply, which they recognize is going to be an increasing problem for globally as the population continues to increase. They recognized that there could be benefits in terms of agricultural efficiency and just the ability to grow more and again feed more people in a more efficient way. They could identify animal cruelty being reduced because of the need to, this wouldn't be livestock that would be killed, but that it would be created in a different way. So they also can identify pretty quickly potential risks. And I really think it's the potential that's important because they don't know. They can more readily recognize the benefits that these would happen. On the risk side, it's more the unknowns. What would the long-term health effects be? This to them is a new area of science, so they don't know that it's been around until we talk about the production of insulin or rennet for cheese making, which have been around for decades. This is something to their view that's brand new. And like any new area of scientific study or pharma or anything else, there is the concern about what are we doing that could have long-term consequences for human health. So that's sort of fundamentally the initial concern that people go to, but they can draw out other concerns about, could this potentially have an impact on the agricultural sector and specifically around jobs and the economy as relates to that sector? Could there be other unknowns that they haven't anticipated that could be problematic? Those are kind of initially where they go, and then as we provide them more information, there are some concerns, some potential risks that generate more concern than others.
So at that point, I remember basically handing them a list of, okay, here are 8 potential benefits that have been kind of discussed in the literature, go through them and let's vote on these. And 2 of them came up high on the list. And there were surprising twists in both, I think at least one of them,
right,
they locked into. One was this issue of let's feed the global population. The other one had to do with antibiotic resistance. Can you talk a little bit about that one? Because I thought that was quite interesting. So
they pretty quickly in these groups identified that as, they recognized that as a problem with our food supply now, that this increased antibiotic resistant bacteria that they have heard as a result of the increased use of antibiotics in livestock production. So that as a potential benefit, because cellular agriculture or cultured meat doesn't require the use of those, was really resonated with them and spoke to something that they see as a problem that we're having in our society. The challenge is that if you draw that out the reason you don't need those, you don't need the antibiotics is because it is such a clean process. And that sort of bumps up against a concern people have, and one of the ones that we tested actually, which is anecdotally, people in the group talk about how so many more kids have allergies these days and food intolerances. And so this idea that a more antiseptic environment and ways that things are produced has led to increased food allergies is something that they think is the case. And so the idea that that this is a very clean process does raise some concerns about, you know, are kids today not getting enough dirt? Are they not getting exposed to enough bacteria? So there is kind of there are two sides to that argument. But just an antibiotic resistance in and of itself, they kind of instinctually recognize as a problem, and so see that the benefit of that here.
Yeah, I think that was an interesting thing that I wouldn't have predicted that they'd talk about the problem with an over sterile environment.
Right.
Talk a little bit about, because then we put a list of potential.
Yeah, and can I just touch on one of the benefits we tested was this idea that that agricultural products could be designed to be healthier. For instance, lower cholesterol levels, less fat, etc. And the challenge there, first of all, that didn't resonate as much as the other benefits, and I think it ties into their assumption at the beginning that these are genetically modified organisms, or somehow that there is a modification happening. And that is something that generates more anxiety and concern rather than comfort. And so in one respect, the video we showed talked about it being the same meat but a different process. But then when we talk about the fact that foods could be, or meats could be designed, if you will, I'm sure there's a better scientific way to say that, to be healthier, that gets into, well, are you modifying them? And so that's kind of, again, another one where there's a double-edged sword to that argument. So sorry, let's go to the negatives.
I mean, it's always interesting. A lot of times you don't really anticipate how the conversation is going to go.
Right.
Until you're in it.
Right.
They'll take it in very interesting directions. Let's talk a little bit about the concerns list, which I think we saw sort of similar things pop up that we hadn't anticipated.
Yeah, and I think they were the ones that I've already mentioned. This, the fact that these organisms may behave in unanticipated ways. Scientists do great things, and our society has come so far because of all the scientific development. But there's trial and error involved, and it gets to the importance of having oversight, but also just this idea of a track record. The public doesn't want something brand new to be released and sort of be guinea pigs. So understanding what are going to be the consequences is important to them, and they recognize that in something that's such a new area that there can be unanticipated problems as well as benefits. And so kind of how those relate to human health most fundamentally and importantly, but also, you know, are there other impacts that relate to the environment, society, et cetera. One of the ones that they brought up that we didn't really introduce was, could it create a culture, a world of haves and have-nots? That may tie into some of the sort of undercurrent of the political dynamics in the country today, but this idea that, and they felt strongly, they wanted to know that livestock or traditional meat would still be available. This is sort of an and rather than a replacement. And there was this concern, though, that cultured meat, could it eventually become that's what the have-nots or the more poorer people have to eat, and that the traditional livestock is what goes to the haves or the wealthier individuals. So to your point of the value of a focus group for kind of unearthing viewpoints that we wouldn't necessarily have anticipated, but are important for people, everyone that's interested in pursuing this area of science, to think about and to be aware of.
Yeah, I think the other thing that came up, which was quite interesting, is they really focused on the impact on jobs.
Yes.
What would the impact be on traditional farming? And I thought that was also quite interesting.
And it really came up organically on their own. We did test a message later in the group, but that really came up. They surfaced that themselves. And they think broadly about the agricultural sector. It's not just the farmers and those who are working on the farms, but it's the transportation. And there's a recognition that that our economy, there's a large section that at least these individuals feel, is related to the agricultural sector in terms of transporting grain, transporting livestock, transporting eventually to grocery stores, things like that. So there is this concern about what that means. And it's all around this unknown. There's the unknown of the health impacts for humans. There's the unknown about what this means for the economy. They can't really understand, would there be more jobs created? Would it offset? We didn't play that out for them, and they can't really, they couldn't really play that out on their own. And so this idea of, what are the consequences? They're not sure, but they surface these as potential concerns. I actually found it interesting that we had some people in the group who were Orthodox or born-again Christians, Orthodox Jews. We had people who were extremely religious and some who weren't at all. And the moral, ethical concerns really didn't surface. That's not to say there are not going to be individuals out there who are concerned about that. And we did hear some people in the group just say this isn't natural. They didn't really understand, they're used to having animals that are slaughtered on a farm, et cetera. And so this was just sort of hard to get their heads around. But they didn't really articulate it in a way of being immoral. The other thing that came up, but was not their first and front concern, but taste. And I think that gets to what I found also interesting is when we talk about, when they identify, and then we talk more about the potential to have an increased food supply in our ever-growing population, they tended to talk about that more about people who are in developing world, not in our society, not in our country. And I think that had to do with, A, they feel that there isn't a pretty abundant supply of food here. Yes, there is hunger, but it is not sort of on the scale that you see in some of the developing world. But also, they didn't really find it appealing to them personally. Would they go to the grocery store and want to buy this and eat it? They were skeptical. But they saw the value. They could think on a more intellectual level with their head rather than their taste buds, I guess, that this could make a lot of sense.
So we also had a discussion with them about if there were risks, who was going to be responsible in terms of oversight. And we put a bunch of options up there, government agencies, scientific researchers, consumer groups, chefs. We put a lot of things in front of them, and it was interesting that they didn't lock onto one person or one particular group or profession, but really talked about needing to have multiple.
Right, and I think that this is partly a function of where we are in terms of there is an all-time low confidence in institutions in this country, and that's not just government institutions, that's sort of across the board. There's skepticism of government and government leaders, there's skepticism of business, there's skepticism even of scientists. Not that people don't recognize and value the important role scientists play and have, but any one entity or one person or one party who is self-interested here raises a red flag. And so that's why really what I think they're saying is we want a system of checks and balances. We want to have a variety. So government has a role to play, if that's the FDA, if that's the USDA, if that's other entities. NGOs and other groups like that have a role to play. And then more specifically, the scientists who are developing this and or other scientific bodies who truly have the expertise that government may not have. So they're looking for oversight, they're looking for if you will, consumer protections. They just want to make sure that those risks are managed, are anticipated, are managed, and are mitigated. And then on the other side of the coin, the benefits are realized to the greatest extent possible. But to do that, they're not looking for one organization or one body. They're looking for some sort of consortium or system of checks and balances that is going to ensure that this area of scientific study is pursued in a responsible way, that it has the greatest benefit and the least risk.
So at the end, you came out with some strategic considerations, realizing that these were just focus groups. I think one of them that we realized early on was people were hungry. They're very, very hungry for more information about exactly what is this? Are
Right.
you cloning cells? Are you using bacteria to produce milk? What exactly was it? There was a lot of hunger for more precision on that. But there were a bunch of other things, I think, that popped out.
Right, and I think that hunger for precision is a delicate balance for you and others that are in this field, because they want to know how it works, but they don't want to be overly complicated. They don't want to be confused, and so there's this fine balance between how do you give them enough of a sense of what this is, so that the idea that this is the same meat is something that makes sense and is credible to them. And ultimately, if they can feel that, they indicate there's more acceptance. The reluctance becomes, is this genetically modified? Is this changed in some way? How is this really the same meat as the meat that would have been slaughtered in the slaughterhouse and then delivered to my grocery store? So there is a need to provide that kind of general sense to the extent possible without being overly complicated of what the process is, so that people understand that it is essentially the same meat. The other things that they're interested in knowing are just generally speaking, and it gets to the checks and balances, and it gets to the lack of trust that's across the board in this country right now. As transparent as people and scientists in this field can be about what is happening, kind of where they are in the process. If people know this is early stages, that made them feel better than being in a focus group and thinking that this is going to be on the grocery shelves tomorrow. That also helps when there's a transparency and the storytelling about how far back this area of scientific study has been used and used successfully. So this track record when it comes to insulin or when it comes to rennet, that was compelling and important to them. And I think understanding that ultimately cultured meat is where the greatest resistance is. Medical applications really wholeheartedly, strongly endorsed, particularly when it's one that has such a track record as insulin. Non-food products seem to make a lot of sense. You know, if we can not kill cattle and have leather boots, then let's do that. When it gets to what I'm ingesting or giving to my kids to eat, then that's where, and it's a question of the, as we said, the health impacts, the taste, and it's just being different than what they are used to and what they've always known. That's where the greatest resistance lies. I'll also say cultured meat is not a particularly positive term, and if there's potential to have another moniker for it, there may be benefits to that. But that's where the kind of greatest resistance lies. And so telling that story in a transparent way will be important, that there's a history here, and that isn't just sort of coming on the scene in 2018 or 2020 or whatever the year is. And then being aware that there's that concern about the replacement of livestock and kind of how does this fit into our food stream, not necessarily replacing something else, but providing another means for nourishing our increasing population.
Yeah, because they did come back to this issue of choice.
Yes.
They always wanted choice.
And that's a very American value and ideal, and people do not want to lose or give up choice.
So what's next, and what's the logical step? Because we've done these before and then expanded them to a larger survey.
Right. So, I mean, I think, as I said, this provides a really, I think, rich sense of how people respond and kind of what biases and concerns they bring to when they learn about this area of scientific study. I would say that it's important to sort of quantify and understand how does this play out among the American public, broadly speaking. So as we've done for other projects with you, nanotechnology, et cetera, conducting a national survey where we can then say with statistical reliability that X% of Americans, when they hear about this area of scientific study, where do they come down on the risks versus the benefits? Who thinks the risks outweigh the benefits? Who thinks the benefits outweigh the risks? And probably, we've seen in other research, a lot of people sort of hold out an opinion and don't feel qualified to make one until they get more information. But the more information you give, you can understand what are the things that generate more confidence and more excitement and hope. What are the things that generate a lot more concern and resistance? And so understanding both kind of where the public is now and potentially if the decision is made to quantify this, that also provides you a baseline for as this area of scientific study is developed and introduced into the marketplace and other things, you'll have the ability to kind of see, do attitudes change and shift, and if so, how? Among whom. The benefit of a survey is not just looking at the American public overall, but we can understand which segments of the public are the most optimistic and hopeful, which ones are the most reticent and expressing the most concern, so that you can understand, and others who can understand, are there groups that particularly need reassurance around the introduction of this new development.
Well, I hope we get a chance to conduct it.
Yeah, well, we would love that. So
Thanks for coming by.
Great. Thanks so much. It's been a great opportunity to continue our partnership with you, but also to explore another area of scientific study. And here, I think a lot of things, there's similar themes in terms of the way people approach something that they don't know anything about, but this is a unique one that really has, as these participants identify, a lot of important benefits, but those unknowns that raise questions and concerns that hopefully can be addressed. So, thank you.
Thank you.